Welcome to the Noir Poise podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise. What would you define as toxic
As far as just people or in general,
in general?
I would say something that's toxic is whatever's bad for you, whatever it takes away and not give.
Okay. I don't know about you, but I think most people actually have been in toxic environments, and some of us deal with it until the day we die, and some of us run away from it. But I ask you, what would you define as toxic? Because I think toxic environments can look different for different type of people, and something that may be toxic to you may not be toxic to me, and vice versa. I was looking up some of just like the generalized definitions or signs of a toxic environment, and some of the ones that I came across were constant criticism, gossip, disregard of feelings, people who don't take accountability, blaming, controlling, having no respect for your boundaries, feelings, or your needs, so on and so forth. So those are just some basic examples.
That's interesting because some of the examples you gave, I think, could be very subjective.
And that's why I asked you, because I feel like what can potentially be toxic for one person may not be for the next. And I think it depends on the situation and your upbringing and what you're used to, what you're capable of dealing with.
As you're defining the word toxic, it's honestly making me look back at myself, wondering, have I been toxic? Because some of the things that you're reading, I'm like, I could see myself in a sense, someone judging me or someone describing me as controlling. If I'm, saying something that goes against what they believe or constant criticism, I could see that too. So it made me wonder, have I been toxic? And that's why I ask if being toxic is subjective, because maybe I think I'm giving constructive criticism while someone else may think, no, you're just always criticizing.
Well, I think it depends, because when I think of toxic, the actual definition just means poisonous. And when we think of the term poisonous, it's basically something that can cause harm to you in some way, shape, or form. So I wouldn't necessarily say if you've done those things, it's you being toxic. I think if it's a consistent thing, like if that's your consistent approach with that particular person, that can then make you toxic. Or if it's a situation where the person is expressing how the controlling makes them feel or the criticism makes them feel, and you continuously do it anyway, I think that's when you can then label yourself as a toxic person. But all of these things, I mean, yeah, we've all blamed people before. We've all at some point tried to control situations. We've all criticized to some extent. We've all maybe disregarded someone's feelings, right? I don't think we do it intentionally to hurt people, though, and I think that's the difference. And also doing it after the fact of someone expressing how it makes them feel or what it's doing to them, in a sense. I think after the fact of that being expressed and you still choose to move in that particular manner and you don't put in the effort to take into consideration their feelings, is toxic in itself. Like one of the definitions, disregarding the person's feelings and their needs and having no respect for their boundaries.
I could see that. One of my problems with modern day society is I think we too often try to paint everything into a cloud 9 type of picture where everything should be good and peaceful and happy. Because I'm wondering if it's sometimes necessary to be in a toxic environment for your growth.
I mean, I think I get what you're trying to say. I don't think toxic is the right term to use in that statement, though, because I was actually going to mention or at least ask a question pertaining to what's toxic versus an environment where you're uncomfortable and you need to grow within it. So I think toxic might be like the wrong term to use, although, yeah, depending on your perspective and how you deal with situations, you can grow from toxic situations, but I don't necessarily think that we need to be in toxic environments in order to grow.
I can see that, but let me maybe elaborate a little more. So, in my mind, there's avoidable toxic environments and unavoidable toxic environments. An avoidable toxic environment, it may be something like you're at work and coworkers are always gossiping. That's something where you can more easily distance yourself from. But what if the toxic environment is your own household?
Well, in most cases, that is what it is.
What if it's your spouse? What if it's your parent? What if it's a sibling or someone so closely tied to you that it's almost impossible to get out of that environment?
Well, yeah, toxic environments can be in those situations. It's not just outside of the home, it's usually inside of the home because these are family members that you feel like you have no choice but to deal with, or these are your significant others that you feel like you have no choice but to deal with. So that's why it can become toxic because there's no, well, not that there's no way of avoiding it, but you can't run from it, in other words.
Yeah.
So dealing with it can often become toxic to your growth because you have to deal with it in a sense. And I actually looked up like what are some feelings that people tend to experience when they are dealing with toxicity inside of their home. And it basically said like feeling isolated or you can't depend on anyone for emotional or physical support, constantly walking on eggshells or a state of alertness. So that can define an environment where it may be a little bit toxic. Because I feel like, and this is, of course, my opinion, but dealing with people in general, we don't understand each other until we express certain things. We don't understand each other until we actually learn more about each other. So there are going to be certain characteristics or certain responses that may feel toxic in that space, but I don't define that as toxic if a conversation is had on multiple occasions and there's effort and improvement being done. I don't think that's toxic. I don't know what the world defines it as. I think that's a situation where if change isn't done, then yeah, it can become toxic, but the person is clearly not dismissing your emotions, not showing no respect or boundaries. So in that case, they're working towards a space where they can provide a more peaceful and healthy environment for you. So I don't define that as toxic personally. I think toxic is, for example, someone is overly critical and you express to them what the criticism does to you, but they still choose to do it and not just do it, but do it for their benefit in a sense.
Do you think most people who are toxic are aware that they're toxic, or they
No.
just don't take whatever the person's saying seriously?
I don't think most people know because we carry around, or I should say, we pick up certain habits and certain ways of living and operating according to what we grew up with, how we were raised, our background. So I don't think people are always aware of it. But again, the biggest part of the signs for me was disregard, because in my opinion, I feel like anyone can do those things at some point in time. But if a loved one is expressing to you that being in that environment when you're doing that is detrimental to their growth, detrimental to their state of mind, as a loved one, I'm going to make an effort, I'm going to make an effort to make a change. I think it becomes toxic where that person is unwilling to improve. And in a case where they are aware of their toxicity, choose to do it because they enjoy doing it for whatever reason. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. This is how I personally perceive things, and feel free to let me know if you think it's good or bad. It's just the way I've been living my life. But I asked you the question earlier about, staying in that toxic environment or avoidable versus unavoidable toxic environments, because similarly to when, you get sick, your body builds antibodies. I kind of wrap my head around being in an unavoidable toxic environment that way, where I kind of just say, you know what? I know how this person is. I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to get used to it. Whether that means dismiss what they're saying or build thicker skin, whatever it might be. But do you think that's a good way if someone is in a unavoidable situation like that?
Honestly, I feel like that's what I do too. I do feel like sometimes there are situations that we have to face head on, and there are situations where you have to walk away. And that's how I look at it when it comes to situations like that. So I think there are environments where you kind of have to grow within that environment and deal with it. But when I say deal with it, I don't mean like this person is consistently badgering you and disturbing your peace in an intense way. That I think it's okay. So I think it's important to be able to differentiate what's an environment that is here to develop you and what's an environment that is here to keep you down. So when I think of toxic environments, I think of the second. This environment is keeping me down. This environment is burdensome. I cannot accomplish goals because of this environment. That's a toxic environment. The first situation is more so you're going through hard times. That's how I see it. Dealing with people, there are going to be difficult situations, bad habits that the other may have that you have to deal with and learn through and grow with. As long as the individuals are willing to work, that's not toxic to me. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Toxic is when it's a consistent burden. And no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter what you try, it disturbs your peace. It disturbs your ability to develop. It disturbs your ability to grow. That's toxic.
I think the problem I'm trying to wrap my head around is how do you differentiate that exactly? Because I could think back to times when I thought I was in a toxic environment, but it wasn't until I developed later that I saw, oh no, I wasn't in a toxic environment. I was just being developed. So I'm still trying to figure out how do you define, I'm in a place now where I'm being developed. Yes, it hurts. Yes, I'm hearing the opposite of what I want to hear now. Yes, it seems like my emotions are being disregarded, but it will lead me to a better place.
Okay, so let me think of some examples. So let's say there's a parent-child relationship where the parent has always been overly critical, negative with their words, unsupportive, and no matter what the child does, the parent finds a way to criticize in a negative way. Originally, the parent may think they're doing it for the betterment of the child. But let's say now the child gets older, they've been dealing with it their whole lives, and they choose to express what that has done to them and inform the parent how much it's a detriment to them, how much it has stunted their growth instead of allowing them to develop through the process. And even in their adulthood, the child expresses to the parent that the words are doing extreme harm. In a situation like that, now the parent knows this is what my actions have done. My toxic behaviors has prevented my child from developing appropriately. At that point in time, especially if there's multiple conversations, at that point in time, if the parent does not make improvements on how they communicate with that child and they continue to badger, they continue to criticize, they continue to find fault in everything that that child does, that's an example of a toxic environment where if that child chooses to distance themselves from the parent, it's understandable because after conversation, the parent has not made an effort to improve their behaviors. In fact, let's just say like they do it more and find humor in it at times. So in a situation like that, that to me is toxic versus same original beginning. A conversation happens between parent and child. Parent acknowledges that they were unaware and they thought that they were doing something to help improve the child, apologizes and continues to make an effort to do better and be better going forward. And each time the parent makes the mistake of doing it again, the child is able to tell the parent, you just did it. It just happened again. They have a conversation through it. They both grow through it. While, yes, that environment was toxic, it is no longer toxic because they're growing through it. So to me, that's an example of you're growing through the process versus this is an environment where you have to step back or distance yourself in order for you to develop.
That definitely helps. So a toxic person is always going to be toxic in every situation.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's really one-sided where if someone is trying to develop you, there may be times, yeah, they criticize you, but there's going to be other times where they praise you.
Right.
But a toxic person is going to be all criticism or all toxicity all the time.
Yeah, but honestly, I feel like it boils down to the individual who feels like the environment is unhealthy for them. You know what environments are doing to you. You know how it makes you feel. You know if it's stunting your growth. And I think that's a decision you make. To be honest with you, even if it's a situation where now the person is making effort, if you feel like it's disturbing your peace to the point where you cannot develop, if you make a conscious decision to step away, I think that's okay too. So at the end of the day, the way I view it is toxic is subjective. Like we said, it depends on the individual. What may be toxic for me may not be toxic for you, and vice versa. So it's the person who's being affected that has to then make a decision on, is this environment toxic to me? Analyze the situation and recognize, is it preventing me from growing? Is it preventing me from getting to my goals? It's one thing if something has slowed you down a little bit, but if it's a consistent trend where it's slowing me down and preventing me from growing and developing, then that is toxic to you. And that's okay to then make that decision that is toxic to you, no matter what other people may think about the situation or how they observe it from the outside in. It's all about what it's doing to you internally, is how I see it.
I wish I knew how to deal with that, like being in a toxic environment, because my natural reaction has always been to run away.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's a bad thing, unless it was something dealing with my immediate family.
Mm-hmm.
Any sign of me being in a toxic environment, I've always ran away.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. Like, if I think of the pros, yeah, I kept my peace. You know, I watched the drama or the issues unfold from far away. But at the same time, I would say the cons is I never gave anybody the chance, or I never gave relationships the chance to develop. Because I didn't know if that person was being toxic, or if they're just being critical, or if they're just being, you know, if I'm misunderstanding them. But the first sign, I just run away. So I wish I knew how to deal with that environment better.
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to differentiate like what's actually toxic. Because I feel like this day and age, if we're completely honest, we throw words around a lot and it makes us come off overly sensitive.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we expect to always be on cloud nine, and
Yeah.
whenever it looks like we're not going to be, I think we make it seem like a bigger issue than it is.
Right. That's why I'm so big on defining words and understanding what it actually means. Because a situation where you just don't like how it makes you feel, that doesn't mean it's toxic. You just don't like it. Now, we all know with growth comes uncomfortability. So it's being able to differentiate what's a fear for you and you're afraid to face it, or you don't want to be bothered, versus this is harming me. Toxic, in my opinion, is this is harming me. Everything else is more so, I just don't feel like dealing with it. Like what you just expressed to me is more so, nah, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. That's not toxic. That's just, you don't want to deal with it. It's not the environment that you want to be in. And that's okay too. That's your decision. But I think there are times in life where you have to recognize, am I uncomfortable because this is not what I'm used to? Because with growth and change, you're going to be uncomfortable, but great things come from those. So sometimes we have to know when to be able to sit in a situation and deal with it, learn through it, grow through it, you know, like discuss certain things that make us uncomfortable. How many times have we had certain conversations that made you uncomfortable, but we had the conversation no matter how hard it was and we grew through it? Now, if you chose to run, we wouldn't have been where we are right now. So understanding that not everything is toxic. Toxic is, it is literally disturbing your peace. It is causing a detriment to your life. It is preventing you from moving forward. It is suffocating you. That to me is what toxic is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of situations we are put in, we just don't feel like dealing with it. You know what I mean?
Do you ever think that we should temporarily remove ourselves from toxic environments, like maybe to get a breather? Because again, just going back to, some environments are really unavoidable, and I'm trying to just be really sensitive and getting a better idea of what should people do, or what should I do if I find myself in an environment where I cannot avoid this, but it's a detriment to my mental health. Like, do I learn to step away for a moment and then come back just to kind of regain energy just to deal with it? Do I just make the difficult decision of cutting it off completely? Like, what have you done in those situations? Like, where you feel like you can't avoid this person, but this person is clearly toxic to you?
Honestly, this may not be the right answer, but I do think it depends on the type of relationship. I see you smirking.
Yeah.
You always want me to give these black or white answers, and it's never going to be black or white. It's gray. It's always gray for me because it really depends on the situation. I don't believe in handling situations left or right. It really depends on all of the context of it. So, depending on the type of relationship. Now, I've had relationships like close family relationships where obviously I can't just dip and never talk to the individuals again. So for me, the short distance has helped or changing the dynamic of the relationship. There are general relationships that I have had where I'm like, this person's behavior is becoming a problem for me. Where every time I have a conversation with you, the way I walk away from it, it does not do me right. Or if it's a situation where you notice you're always giving, 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 and the person's always taking, taking, taking. There are certain relationships where unfortunately you may not be able to just be like, bye, never gonna see you again. So for me personally, the short breaks have helped or changing the dynamic of my relationship with that person. So if I was super close with that person where you felt comfortable calling me like about every other situation, I start to distance myself in a way where the dynamic of our relationship kind of shifts slowly. So I guess you could say I kind of shifted to a different type of season of our relationship because people are always evolving and growing. So the way they are in that moment, a couple years from now, they may not be that way. Sometimes, depending on the behaviors that people have or we have, it may trigger others or their behaviors may trigger us. And I've been in situations actually not too long ago where a loved one's behaviors were triggering me. And it took me a long time to recognize it. And I had a conversation with you multiple times where I was just like, yeah, I got to stop hitting this person up because I can't have the relationship with them where I'm talking to you all the time because your behaviors are not evolving quick enough for me to be able to deal with it in this point in my life. Does that mean that I don't love you? No, I still love you the same way. I'll still check in or whatever the case is, but I purposely changed the dynamic of the relationship for that season because I knew I couldn't handle it. Handle it in the sense like if I knew I continued to deal with it, it would have done more harm to the relationship than if I was to step back and have a little bit of distance. So I think there are times where distance is appropriate depending on the type of relationship that it is. Like, for example, if it's a parent or a sibling, some people are comfortable being like, yeah, I'm not talking to my sibling anymore. I'm not that type of person, but there are people who can make that bold decision, and to each his own. If that's what works for you, if that's what gives you peace of mind, do you. I don't know the dynamic of people's relationships, but for me, I've found that the short distance has helped me. Unless it's a situation where the person is just there's no change whatsoever happening, like you're getting worse or you're still the same way, then you have to make a decision where whether you want this person in your community or you don't.
Did you have a conversation with this person? Because I'm asking this because even if someone is toxic, before a decision is made on whether to remove yourself from that environment, should a conversation be had, or are some environments so toxic that it's better to just slowly or but surely distance yourself?
I honestly think a conversation should be had. That's the mature thing to do. Not everyone will be receiving of it, but that is the mature thing to do, to have a conversation with that person and see if changes occur. And then you can make your decision from there. I'm trying to think of different examples on if I did have conversations at every single point in time. And to be honest, I did not. So maybe I was toxic in that environment.
So
Maybe I was the toxic one by just like all of a sudden being like, yeah, I'm just not going to hit you up all the time. I'll check in here and there, but I just can't be around
so
you
you
too
think that was
much.
wrong of you, or was it warranted?
In my head, it was warranted, but if I put myself in the shoes of the person, it probably isn't that fair. Because most people, like we said in the beginning, don't know they're being toxic.
We've had debates about this, but there's certain people who I don't think deserve a conversation
Mm.
where enough was said beforehand, even if it was in bits and pieces, where they should get the picture.
But what if they don't? Because then isn't that just assuming that they know what they're doing?
I can see why you say that, but I think sometimes conversations only exposes yourself.
Mm. You
to
actually
get
told me
hurt
that.
further. Yeah.
Interesting, because I'm the type to try to have a conversation in most cases. At least now. I'm not talking about like long ago, but now I try to have certain conversations. And I think there was a point in time where I think I had a conversation, or at least tried to have a conversation with someone, and it backfired. And I remember that's what you told me the following time, where I felt like, should I have a conversation?
Yeah.
And you were like, at this point, like, what's the point of repeating yourself if you already said what you had to say? At this
Right.
point, you just have to take action.
People who are not toxic but exhibit toxic behavior, I think once you bring certain conversations to them and you show them that, hey, what you said to me had a negative impact, even if they don't agree, they're going to be willing to learn. Like there's several times where
That's true.
you or someone else said, I didn't like what you said to me or how you said to me. And I disagreed, but
Mhm.
I still told myself, you know what? If I made them feel that way, then there's something I have to change.
Mhm.
That, in my mind, is someone who, if they're still acting that way, but you see them trying to, yeah, then have another conversation that says, you know what, I spoke to you about this before, but I don't really see too much progress being made, although you said you would make progress. But there's some people where you express something to them and they dismiss you. It's like, why would you give them the benefit of being more toxic to you? So I don't think a conversation should always be had.
I see what you're saying. I just feel like it's the mature thing to do, but
Mature doesn't always mean right, in my opinion.
yeah, you make a valid point. I guess it, again, depends on the situation. For me, at least, I think it depends on the type of relationship. Because if it's like my sibling or my parent, I'm probably going to keep trying because we here for the long haul, bro. You know, we ain't going nowhere. Whereas if it's like someone that I just met a couple years ago, it's like, okay, maybe our season of friendship is over and that's okay, you know? So I think it does depend on the type of relationship, and it depends on if you want to continue keeping that person in your life as well. Like if you're willing to keep trying at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. Are you willing to keep on trying? Are you willing to keep on being burdened and uncomfortable for the sake of having this person in your life?
We had a conversation with someone where they said this, and I thought it was really deep. I think you did as well, where they said you can't change people, but you just learn to navigate around them.
Yeah.
So how does that fit
I think
in
my mom said
within?
that actually.
Oh yeah, it was. I didn't
Yeah.
want to say her name, but
that,
um,
that's a good thing. You could say that.
okay. With that mindset, how do you then deal with those toxic environments that's in right in the middle of your home or within a close family member or even friend that you can't really get away from?
For me, I change how I operate with you, and or I distance myself. So if we were hanging out all the time, you may not see me as often. If I was visiting pretty often, you won't see me as often. If I was calling to have phone calls with you, or you know what I mean, like the effort won't be the same because I need the space in order to cope. And if it's someone that I love enough to be like, you know what, despite it all, I still want to keep this person, I'll probably just change the way I operate around them. So maybe I'll share less. I'll be more guarded. And again, distance. Distance always works for me. Like I'm already a type of person that needs my space and needs my privacy and my alone time to process things. So me being around that person just won't do any good. If anything, it'll do more harm because now we're going to start clashing and the relationship might end in a very negative way versus I'm changing the dynamic of our relationship and how I operate with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it seems like sometimes you got to learn when distancing yourself is going to save the relationship.
And there are situations where you just have to remove yourself from the equation. If it's a situation where you know for a fact you cannot deal with it, removing yourself from the equation may be the right answer. But that's for you to determine, you know, like I think the person who's being affected should be the one to make that decision, not
Yeah.
the other. So that's why for me, I choose to change the way I operate with that person, is because if I continue to operate the same way and I'm constantly being triggered, you're constantly like hitting certain nerves. Now I react a type of way, it's going to cause extreme conflict that could have been avoided if I just changed the way I operated with you.
Yeah. You know why I love that? I think that people who are toxic to the people who they take for granted, who they think you'll
We'll
never
always be
leave.
there.
You'll always
Yeah.
be there. So sometimes when you show that person that there's a possibility that you may lose me or you may lose what we have, I
Hmm.
think that might be
A
the
wake up
best
call.
way, a wake up call to change any toxic environment.
Yeah, I agree with that. We said this quote in a previous episode, I think in season 1, but I heard this quote and I always remember it. I actually live by it a little bit now, but it says, I was taught that keeping quiet was keeping the peace until I discovered whose peace am I keeping. And I think it's important to determine how to deal with situations according to your peace and not just everyone else's. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noir Poise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.